Taught here. Darkness. Monsters. Blackness.
Hey, you composing gloves here, and today we're talking about how to listen for inspiration, right? So, okay, I've got a track I've been working on in the drum and bass series, and this is just a big idea that I felt like was sort of bigger than any sort of genre. It's necessary for any genre, and this is what the idea comes down to. There's several different types of listening, and you've probably gotten to the point where you are stuck, and you have reached a point where you've got the elements down, sort of, and you're just having problems figuring out what to do next, like what goes next. So there's a couple things you should look at before you look to listening for your answer. First, what are your elements? Are they mainly rhythmic, melodic? What frequency spectrums are you using? Look at expanding those. Oftentimes it's those. Do you have a lot of rhythms? Are they things that you could vary up? Could you add more content? Do you have simply one idea? Then you may consider creating a second idea. You know, there's all these things that you could do to sort of try and mix and mash ideas. Now, once you sort of have something sort of put together and you're looking for those things to sort of make it shine, or maybe you're trying to figure out what elements you do need, there's a couple kinds of listening. There's critical listening, where you're basically sort of, that's sound design listening. Like you're listening at the spectrum, like specific parts of the song, very, very specific listening. That's critical, analytical listening. Then you have your listening for inspiration. So there's two ways of hearing your track. You probably listen to one a lot more than the other and don't realize it. That is where you are listening to just like that chunk. Let's say you're only listening to one chunk. You're listening to this chunk 100 times over while you work on it, and you're sort of going crazy because you're like, what else could go there and stuff like that. But this chunk, so you get it the way you want it, and then when you play it back from here, it sounds way different. Like it doesn't, you're like, oh man, that doesn't jive, that doesn't groove, or maybe you're like, oh, that grooves real good. So you got to keep in mind that people are going to listen to your music from the beginning over, unless they're going to do some sort of weird mix with it. So you're going to want to, so what I'll do is I'll listen while I'm working on something, because that's like really helpful, but people will stay in the mode of critical listening when they're working like that, but they never switch to listening for inspiration. So you got to go back to the beginning. You got to sort of picture how it fits in there. Sometimes you may need to listen to it several times. And then the secret to inspirational listening is when something bothers you, you just got some inspiration, freaking stop what you're doing right now and do your thing. For example, I put off putting panning here for a little while, but finally I was doing something else, but I'm like, I have to put panning there. If I don't put panning there, I'm going to forget, and I'm going to lose that moment of inspiration. So just keep that in mind. That is listening for inspiration, where you listen to it from the beginning. You'll notice that as your track gets longer, you may be able to set reference points not all the way back at the beginning, but I'll always do a listen from the beginning all the way to the end, and you want to be happy with it's happening. You don't want anything sort of jumping out at you like, that bothers me. Like, that's the thing because people will put these things off. They'll say, oh, no. Like, you get these weird, I know what it's like, because I do it. And I used to do it, and I do it a lot less now, but it's still occasionally, but I catch it because I'm much more aware of it now. You like want to put it off. You're like, no, I don't need to do that. Like, if for some reason, like, it's like work from that perspective, and you want to have fun, so therefore you avoid work. Like, it's this weird thing. Like, thumbs up if you know what I'm talking about, okay? When those moments hit you, you got to fix it. Because this is the stuff that you skip when you're showing it to your friend. Like, oh, this is a sort of a boring part, so you skip it. To skip to some other part of your song. It's because you listened wrong. And then if you did listen right, you ignored your revelation. You ignored the inspiration that came to you. So you gotta obey those sorts of things. Now, and if it keeps bothering you, you just keep changing it until it doesn't bother you no more. It's literally, you just don't stop until it's fixed. And you think about the elements. A lot of that comes from understanding the elements of music. Like, if you look at in the drum and bass series, elements, the nature of melody, I have some stuff there. I talk about the structure and the things that sort of go in the structure. When you have that sort of in the back of your mind, because when you're composing, you have like what generally goes here, then you get creative with it, and then you find out if it works or doesn't. Like, if you look through, especially the beginning parts of this track, which is called Beneath, just look up the neurofunk stuff. I definitely, like, here, I doubled this in length, because it wasn't jiving. It was just too fast. And that was the inspiration. I'm like, I just need to make it longer, a smoother transition, introduce the idea for longer, because I was introducing ideas too fast. That tends to be my problem. Too much is happening too fast. And you could have the other problem where you don't have enough. And I think that's where a lot of other people sit is not a lot of people. I think people either sit on one side or the other. Get in the middle ground. It's a pretty tough thing because there's different ways to create ideas. Like it's the sound design or whatever. So anyways, that's listening for inspiration. There's another kind of listening. This is like the next layer of listening that people just don't pay attention to usually too much, because you might be saying, okay, that's analytical listening. If you stay in analytical listening, then your listening for inspiration is going to suffer. After you've accomplished these two types of listening, which is now you've like got sort of a track, there's one more thing you need to do, and it's something that I've only recently really started to get the hang of. It's producer listening. Okay, producer listening is when you listen to your track and you say, why is that there? Why did I do that? You completely remove yourself from whatever you're doing before. And because you get rid of the excuses. Because if you say that and you're like talking to the producer, like, why did it? Because of this, that, and this. And the sound, they're all going to be sound design reasons. We're tossing that aside now because who cares? I do not care. As a listener, I want to experience this. This is the thing where you walk up to people. This is what everyone says. They're like, oh yeah, I'm excellent at listening. I'm really good at giving critiques. They consider themselves great at production listening, and they consider it to be a separate subject. And there are people who really do. They've sold themselves like this, and they've got a career going because of it. I don't know any names, but I know that they exist. Usually producers, though, have studied the other kinds of listening, not necessarily as like, oh yeah, I've gone to a class for this. There's no class for this. There's like, they just have a lot of experience in it. But then there's the production listening. We're listening to it. You listen to the idea, the general structure, when it hits you as a listener, trying to hear it for the first time. And then most importantly, you're saying, geez, this isn't jiving like so well. Maybe try something else. And they could be pretty radical changes sometimes. Other times it could be as simple as moving everything over one bar and just putting a little break there, or making one element stick out a little bit more, or some sort of idea doesn't sit with you. You know, you're listening as a producer. So for example, I have a track that I never published, but I plan to. It was called Gonna Party With My Friends. And I just like sort of say that phrase in all sorts of different ways. And it's kind of interesting, and it jived. But I was told by someone that I should create a break where I just say, what did you just say? Like that, you're like, that sounds like a good idea to me. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, so freaking ambiguous. Everyone gives you ambiguous things, but they're listening. Everyone that listens to music for fun and as an enjoyment is listening to it in a form of producer listening. So what they say, they're going to be like that. They're not going to be technical advice. And so the people who think that they're some sort of sound design guru master are going to throw all this great production advice out the window just because they think they know more. It's just total a product of pride. So you should listen, and this is where you get honest critiquers. That's where they're very valuable. They listen, they can tell you things, and they're not going to be very specific things. They're going to be things that you're going to have to take, and then you can bring it down to your levels of listening and sort of make some changes as the creative one. When you're working with other people, this would change who you address in the process. If you address the mixing engineer or you address the artist as like, hey, this would be a cool compositional point. So he told me to do that. I did that. Oh my gosh, it's a great thing. Every time I play it for someone, they're like, when that line comes in, they did not see that coming. They're like, oh my gosh, this is like, what the heck was that? So, and to me, that's like a good thing. They're like, wow, that's cool. So you want to be weary of these kinds of listening. I guess there's really three kinds. There's analytical. So analytical is like the effects, the sound design. There is inspirational. What am I doing it like this? There's inspirational listening. So you go back to the beginning, see how it fits in your context, how it fits in the moment. Great songs, really great songs, usually have the ability to sound great right where they're at and great from the beginning. Usually they're pretty stagnant and like, they're really great songs popularity-wise, not necessarily idea-wise. They're not like academic feats of wonder. They've found a formula that works really well. So that doesn't necessarily mean that your song's like less or worse. Like I have several moments in here where like this comes in. It's kind of loud. 3, 2, 1. That moment right there sort of doesn't fit, but when it comes in again here, it's like, oh, and I leave it on a very unsettling note over here.
Will destroy.
That note's not in the key. So when it ends, it's like, what the heck? And so I was going for that. That was the effect I was going for. So all these kinds of listening are just very, very valuable things, very useful things. Start practicing these. This hopefully will clear up a lot of the blockages you have in your creative process, is understanding it. Now when your friends tell you crap and you think, occasionally you'll get that person whose opinion, you got to use your judgment. Some opinions are just like whatever, but they are an opinion and they did react to your music. So it is still valid. Like, you still should at least think a little bit about, is there something like you should always doubt your superior knowledge and be a little humble. Like, you just should. There's a chance they could be right unless you somehow have the key to the universe and know everything. But of course, you need to also weigh your knowledge against theirs. So, like, if that chance is freaking small, then treat it like a freaking small chance. If it's a big chance, treat it like a big chance. That's generally what we do, but we tend to run it over with we feel like we're superior or something. So those are the types of listening. Hopefully you will take this and use it and be able to get over some stuff. If you have any questions about this, let me know. What's your philosophy on this? Like, I think that this alone is like what solves, after you know the pieces of what goes where, understanding the different types of listening, and you're pretty much good to go. Like, you can get through most creative blocks unless your idea just sucks, in which case you'll be led to ditch most of your ideas. Like, I made some pretty vast changes as I was going here, and did things that some people, they might not do, they might do. This is where, when you're showing your creative process, people will often come into disagreements about what it is that you're doing, precisely because you're listening differently. And when you do listen when you're doing the same kind of listening, you receive different inspiration as to what you like, what you do. It depends on your atmosphere, how you grew up as a person, what you consider good, what music you heard first. It'd be kind of interesting to come up with a theory on how you could raise two people that have the exact same musical tastes. Is that even possible? I mean, right off the bat, I'd say no. Just out of pure instinct and little to no thought, I would say no, it's not freaking possible. But I'm sure we could come up with something that's pretty convincing the other way around if we spent a long enough time thinking about it. Because that's just the experience I've had when ideas seem sort of ridiculous, is when you really, really think about it, what really gives you your musical taste, that kind of a thing. It gets really weird. So that's like a philosophy. That's like that'd be another video, and I'd have to think a little bit more about it. But anyways, that's that. Subscribe and have a blessed day. So it's a pretty simple bell sound. Now, of course, you can do this with a sine wave exceptionally easy and add a few harmonics. So let's talk about how to make this real fast. So, okay. That's what we start off with. And it's a little intimidating to think, now I got to get to that bell texture if you've never done it before. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add a bandpass filter to